Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you guys are. I hope you're having a fantastic day. We got a banger of a video for you guys today. I wanted to showcase a lot of interesting compositions that include Razzle, one of the more recent fusions that came out in the game. It seems to be like every single time you give him a carry, he gives you a mile, so he's the gift that keeps on giving. I also wanted to show you guys from a different standpoint of each progression point of the game. So, you know, some players are a little bit more early game, some are mid game, late game, and end game, right? Well, this account, I would say that I'm working on salutes the con artist, first off. I would say it's a little bit more towards like the mid game point. Being unlucky with not being able to get unkillable compositions has been a frustration of his. But with a couple of key players, as well as Razzle himself, enabled this account to be able to take a composition through a traditional means and really see it bring his overall damage output to a 2-key Ultra Nightmare, 1-key Nightmare territory consistently. Let's get into it. So Razzle himself, of course, being the monster he is, his passive works really, really interestingly, where the more increased speed buff placed by him increases his overall base speed, or total speed, up to a stack of 100 times each time, right? So he's someone that ramps from what would start off as potentially like a 4-3-2-1 ratio type speed, and then turns it up to a 3-to-1 ratio, allowing him to practically keep 100% uptime on his A3, which is the bread and butter of his abilities. Increased speed being a very, very strong aspect, especially when it comes to speed tuning for compositions, really allows the rest of his team to go at a ratio that's a lot faster than what you would see at their base speed. So we're talking about true speeds here. The thing that's really tricky about him is not only does he ramp up over time, but his A1 is very, very interesting that it also provides turn meter boosting. 3 hits by 5% each time is a 15% increase each time, and if you're not careful, you're not observant about that, it can end up turning a composition tune out of sync and ultimately destroying the run, which is why his need to have every single ability, including, you know, the A2 and the A3 being fully booked, is very, very important for this composition to work out. But that's not all. He's joined by Geomancer and Python, who give a amount of percent mitigation, which is very, very key, in tandem with ally protection, increased defense, survivability abilities, as well as block debuffs, which you're going to see from Grizzled Jarl. All of these are going to turn into some cohesiveness when it comes to speed tuning, as well as keeping this composition for the most part affinity friendly. And that is very key when you're doing speed tunes, but particularly for compositions. You want to make sure that they work across various different types of affinity changes. You know, when Clan Boss changes from 50% to one of the other affinities away from Void, excuse me. It's very important to be able to do that. So block debuffs is being very key. I'm going to go ahead and show you guys the speeds real quick so you kind of have an idea of what to look for. Razzle is going at a 230 speed ratio. Of course, that kicks up as the fight goes on. Grizzled Jarl is also at a 232 speed ratio. With increased speed, that'll go up, but, you know, it'll hit a consistent point after a certain bit. Geomancer hitting 212, a little bit more on the slower side of things, but ultimately will be able to do what he needs to do, maintaining that A3 HP burn. Jarek, 232 as well, a pretty fast speed. And then, of course, Python, who goes at a much more significantly lower speed. His key point is being able to cleanse, heal, and provide overall mitigation throughout the entire fight. So those speeds are very, very important. I'll have a link in the calculator below in terms of how the rotation goes. We're going to go and get into it, and then from there, I'll show you guys the gear in case you have any additional, like, you know, desires to see any type of inputs. Let's get into it. Alrighty, I'm gonna go ahead and start this on auto. I believe this is a fully auto composition, and we're just gonna talk and narrate through it as it goes along. Of course, Razzle starting off with his A3, giving everybody the increased speed initially, and you're seeing a lot of buffs from Grizzled Jarl giving the block debuffs, as well as the increased defense, which will also be supported by and offset by Jarek as the fight goes on. The main thing that I think you're gonna see a lot of important elements is, one, that this composition is going to continuously take damage. So some of the gear that you're going to see later on is going to be a contributing factor to the overall mitigation, on top of the fact that we have increased defense and those passes kicking in by not only Geomancer but Python as well. The way that this tune is going to offset once it's fully in sync is you're going to see Jarek provide a consistent ally protection. You're going to see a consistent timing placement for Jarig's ability to have that block debuffs, as well as the cleanse from Python, which also gives block debuffs pretty consistently. This fight can go pretty long, and I believe that as gear improves and as the account owner improves their Great Hall, you'll start seeing an increase not only in damage but survivability, meaning they'll be able to go the distance, and you'll just see overall it'll pick up the pace pretty well. I'm gonna go ahead and disappear. I'm gonna let you guys enjoy the round. All right, not too bad. 30 mil for a good couple of rounds too, considering that this is one of the worst affinities for this composition. So I didn't say this before, but considering how Razzle, Grizzle, Jarl, and Jareg are about the same affinity, which is magic, which is also weak to force affinity, this is actually one of the more lower performing experiences you could have. But give or take the fact that if you're doing Ultra Nightmare on a with a clan that does transition it sometime throughout the day, you can plan your battles accordingly to at least get one hit on Void, which will allow you to get a little bit more than this, maybe somewhere north of like 35 mil plus maybe to 40 mil in terms of total damage, and add that with another key, even if it so happens to be force, will allow you to ultimately reach the top chest for Ultra Nightmare. And as you can see, Khan is in my clan. Unfortunately, he wasn't able to get it all too much today, so that means he's gonna have to save another extra key. But this composition works across multiple difficulties, so in the event that he has an issue in Ultra Nightmare, he can use that fourth additional key as long as he's on top of his keys to get it through there pretty well. But if you want to take a look at it on Nightmare, which was blue affinity, which is overall neutral / positive for him, I mean, he's performing very, very well. You know, top chest for Nightmare is around like 39-ish mil. If you want to round it up to 40 mil, I mean, he supersedes that by an easy 20 to 25 mil. Very, very easy damage for him to get. Let's take a look at his overall gearing for most of his champions, and you can kind of get like an idea of ways that he was able to squeeze out extra mitigation, on top of something else I wanted to talk about. If you could tell, overall stats, he still has to prioritize a little bit of defense just to make sure he's living and able to sustain through the damage he takes. But ultimately, he's still able to play a little bit more aggressively with Razzle's DPS output, which scales with not only attack, but actually even more better so with speed. So you can see he tries to reach about 100% crit rate. He's a little bit short there this round, but that's all right considering that he's trying to get closer and closer, and he's spreading his stats pretty much a little bit everywhere here. But 3,800 attack and 230 crit damage. Well, you know, granted he hits 100% crit rate inside a speed tomb is actually not too bad. Now here's a key point that I didn't bring up: 152 accuracy. When you add the extra 50% increased accuracy that he also gets with that A3, and we didn't talk about that part of it, enables him to reach the desired accuracy ranges. In particular for Ultra Nightmare, it's 250. Being able to hit that is actually a lot more feasible, even though he's technically not there on base stat wise. Now, just to make sure we didn't miss any other caveats there, if you look at it in terms of area bonuses, he didn't have anything extra for his Great Hall contributing towards Demon Lord. So what you see is what you get. But keep in mind, I mean, there's a lot of scaling here that he can go and increase his numbers dramatically with, you know. He did go into Defiant. 2 set bonuses there, which means that he receives roughly about a 30% damage mitigation from AoEs, which, if you know about Clan Boss, it's AoE 1, AoE 2, stun, rinse, repeat. Now, the AoE 2, depending on the affinity, changes, you know, certain extra debuffs or a different set of mechanics that you have to kind of work around, particularly the most annoying one, Spirit, because it doesn't decrease speed, and that can mess up speed tunes like this one if you're not careful for it. But thankfully, with block debuffs and cleansers like Pythian, for example, easy peasy, no problem. Blessing wise, one of the best blessings for Razzle, considering he scales off of attack himself, is Phantom Touch. And if you were there for the Razzle Fusion event, there was also another added event on top of that, which allowed you to farm towards getting his 5-star blessing. So already getting extra bonus damage, extra crit damage, extra attack, all beautiful stats that you want for output for Razzle. And then on top of that, inflicting bonus damage, you're getting everything you need there. Consider Phantom Touch like kind of like a mini War Master proc or Giant Slayer proc, which of course for Razzle, since he hits the way he does, you could either go Giant Slayer or you can go for War Master. If you look at the abilities and the fact that he's going roughly at a 3-1 ratio, he's going to be doing 3 sets of abilities every single time, which is his A3, his A2, and his A1. The A1 may justify a little bit more of going into the Giant Slayer if you want to go for some spike damage there. But in terms of consistency across all different iterations of abilities he uses, War Master may be a little bit more consistent, and I think that's probably what the justification behind this was. Now, he also wanted to make sure that Razzle throughout the comp, especially in the early phases, it takes a little bit to get in sync. And I'll have, like I said, the calculator below in the links for you to take a look at. It takes a little bit of syncing up to do. So during that period, you want to kind of mitigate who particularly gets that stun. And for Razzle, since he does provide increased accuracy and increased speed, you want to make sure that that lines up. So having something like Steadfast in tandem with the other buffs and how they line up enabled Razzle to not be priority target initially. And that helps out quite a bit as well. So if you want to manage stun targeting, there's a whole breakdown on that you can look for, and that it'll definitely give you some information as to why maybe going for Steadfast, the Steadfast Mastery will help out. Of course, running Lore of Steel also varies a little bit, increases a little bit of a percentage of base stats when it comes to the set bonuses, so that's something to keep in mind. Also helping out with the survivability too, now that you keep in mind with that too. So, you know, when you're doing your speed tuning and you're going to run a specific mastery in tandem with specific specs, particularly any type of speed sets, be careful with that and you know, be observant about your true speeds. You want to stay within a certain range. Moving on to Pythian. Pythian so happened to have a blessing that was designed for Brimstone. So accuracy was actually a little bit more of a focus on someone who doesn't typically need it. He went the same route. 157 accuracy plus the increased accuracy gives the buff from Razzle will give him the accuracy needed to land that Brimstone, since Brimstone in its recent nerf requires accuracy to land it in its earlier stages. If he gets a higher blessing, which enables him to have a guaranteed Brimstone proc, then that accuracy becomes a lot less prevalent, right? Considering he doesn't have any area bonuses, the same premise applies. Staying within a certain speed range, making sure he hits 100% crit rate, which he was able to do with Pythian. I guess considering the speeds are a little bit lower, it made it a little bit easier. But healthy amount of defense, healthy amount of HP percent, in tandem with the accuracy enabled his Pythian to do what he had to do. I thought that was a very, very nice little play to add the Brimstone factor into his build, but still having Toxic, getting more damage out of his auto attacks from his A1. getting that extra little bit of debuffs. It goes a little bit of ways, you know, 2.5%. If he was able to land 2 poisons per hit on his A1, gives you about, you know, 5% extra damage right there in that one iteration when the boss gets his turn. Great opportunity to increase that little bit of damage. Squeeze a little bit more out, right? Defiant, that extra mitigation, keeping your team alive. It's all about sustaining and living through a traditional comp, because you can't, you know, bank on doing raw damage when you have something that's not unkillable or block damage oriented. So keeping that in mind from him was very, very important, and it ultimately allowed him to keep going a little bit longer. Now let's move on to Jareg. Jareg is kind of like your resident soaker in a sense, you know, double Defiant. Stayed within the same speed tune, but you can tell that, like, his focus wasn't necessarily so much on damage. It was more so, okay, let's make him tanky, let's make him as healthy as possible within a speed tune, and try to keep up that level of survivability, right? Especially within a Defiant set. You see Defiant all over the place. Here's the kicker, though. He also so happens to provide decreased attack, which is another thing that I didn't talk about, was debuffs. Debuffs are very, very important when it came to this composition. One, Leech from Razzle gave you some lifesteal back, so you would top your health off, being able to sustain some of the damage. On top of the fact that doing decreased attack makes the damage output from the clan boss a lot more less demanding, less taxing on your team. So all those played a tremendous role in keeping the team alive as long as it could. Ally protection, increased defense, and of course being able to get that continuous hail made him much more of a staple, with the blessing that whenever you get subsequent hits from multiple hits, it increased his overall damage reduction. So if you see the idea behind it, he overall was just trying to survive and manage the damage output that was given to him by the clan boss using someone like Jareg. Now, where he could get his damage out, he tried to apply some War Master procs that allowed him to maybe get a little bit more static damage every now and then from Jareg, but ultimately his focus was bring the utility of survival, as well as some complementary healing in tandem with Pythion. Was a nice little engine to kind of give your team a little bit of sustain in the eye of something that's traditional and you're going to take damage throughout the entire fight. Geomancer, on the other hand, provided most of the damage output, as well as some mitigation himself. You know, 15% reduction from opponents that are applying HP burn, that have been applied HP burn, and then deflecting a percentage of that damage back to him. Basically gave Geomancer the outlet to say, like, clan boss, you want to hit me? Go for it. I'm not only going to mitigate it, but I'm going to give you some of that back. And a ultimately legendary champion that just really does a lot without much care in the world. I mean, you could build him super tanky, you could build him super offensive, and if we look at his stats, you got a little bit of both. I mean, a little bit of attack to get that, you know, A2 damage, that A1 damage, give you a little bit more oomph behind it, but ultimately, I mean, he still has a pretty decent amount of defensive nature to keep himself going. Keep in mind, also within a specific speed tune. So speed is key when it comes to creating compositions like this, because you want debuffs and buffs to land at the right appropriate time so that you can stay in sync and can go the distance and have some consistency throughout each of the different turn counts that the boss has. Of course, he has higher, way higher accuracy, which ultimately he doesn't really need, but I'm considering, you know, the amount of stats that he was looking for within his build ultimately enabled him to go a little bit more above and beyond. Now, if, you know, Razzle didn't have the increased accuracy, Geomancer's perfectly available to do what he has to do. So, with or without him, he's still a monster. And you gotta think, you know, using your champions in different areas of the game, you may not always use Geomancer plus Razzle, so him having that extra little bit of accuracy does a little bit in other areas to the game, and I think that's also a really, really nice play. Cruelty stacks here, since Geomancer's damage ultimately comes from his passive A3 combination. Maybe putting something like Cruelty for the rest of your team to benefit from actually isn't a bad idea. You know, giving your team a little bit more increase the damage on a target that has decreased defense by a total amount. So for bosses at stage 1 or blessing level 1 or 2, it's roughly about a 5%. So having Geomancer in that blessing gives a little bit extra, you know, 5% extra damage across the board for your team. Great complementary blessing that I would at least try to have at least one on, you know, in your comp. Last but not least, we got to Grizzle Jaw. Good old Grizzle also has some damage reduction with his blessing, but if you pay attention to the staple that we have across the board is survival is key. Defiant across both of them. He has a broken set on top of that, so that could be some places where you would see and try to iterate some extra stat priorities later on in the future, look for a specific set that has these particular stats that you're looking for, you know, within the same set. So right now he's going more of a direction of stats before sets, but he's leaning now more and more as a mid gamer to getting into, you know, good stats within good sets. And that's that transition. As you progress through the game, you're going to try to get more and more, you know, better stats within better sets, and then try to optimize optimal teams. And you'll see that as you go into mid to late to end game, you'll start seeing more efficiency at that, right? Grizzle Jarl, super tanky. 3.8, probably amongst one of the more tankier ones in the composition within a 232 speed. Key point there again. A decent amount of HP, and then of course a little bit of accuracy there too as well. Even though in this particular case, the heal reduction isn't too much high, you know, in terms of value when it comes to clan boss, because he doesn't really heal himself. But that decreased attack in the event that maybe Jareg doesn't have a chance to hit it, you got a backup, right? So that level of redundancy is very important. It also gives him that extra value where maybe the cooldowns don't line up. Having that duplicate allows you to offset it so that, okay, my Jareg's done his, but the cooldowns are still prevalent. I got Jareg to compensate, so you have that consistency throughout the entire fight, and that's very important, right? Of course, the same aspect, you know, try to get as much mitigation down the defense tree, particularly with like abilities or masteries like Blastproof, which, you know, 2 of the boss's abilities are AoE. Some counterattack in the event that someone gets stunned, right? And then, of course, trying to complement some extra damage with War Master procs is where you ultimately try to reside at with Grizzle Jarl. A very fun composition. I have to admit, doing traditional comps for me has been something that I find to be very nuanced. It has a level of demand, almost, I would say, as demanding as unkillable or block damage based comps, because outside of getting the correct speeds for block damage and of course having certain abilities go in a certain priority and timing, is pretty much you're open to now focus on like a high amount of damage and a high amount of you know, negligence of damage mitigation, because you don't have to worry about it. You're ignoring all your defenses, and you could just focus on raw damage. Whereas traditional comps, it's all about sustaining while complementary getting damage throughout the entire fight, and this is a composition that does it very well. I don't know if you guys notice, most of the speeds, if not all of the speeds, are pretty much under the 250 range. So someone who is making, you know, strides in obtaining speed gear or perception gear or sets like Instinct, for example, that give you some type of extra speed, these speeds are not outrageous to a point where you can't achieve them. And I think that's a very interesting dynamic that Razzle provides compared to other champions. And I'll give you some, for example, Mashalid, who also can keep up increased speed. Regardless, though, because of how this composition runs, Razzle is able to do it at a much faster pace, and believe it or not, he's a heavy hitter himself. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you haven't already considered to like, follow, and subscribe, please let me know how you think about this composition. Is it for you? Is it something that you weren't expecting to be able to see with someone like the Bunny Boy himself? I don't know. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. And with that being said, all you guys, I hope you enjoy your stay, and always remember, stay ascended.